I came through town. It looked about the same. A couple of weeks ago I was here for opening weekend, and there was about 5 to 6 inches of snow on the ground. It was a great view. I had a good view of looking at Crab Lake at my tree stand. Unfortunately, that weekend I did not do as well as the secretary of the DNR. She got her deer the first weekend, and she's still showing off about it. But anytime you're in the North Woods, it's always a good time, and it is a pleasure to be here, not just in Minocqua, but with folks from all throughout the North. And I realize we've got folks from a cross-section all across northern Wisconsin, whether it's from the Northeast, and that's why in some ways it's particularly good to have Paul Jaden with us here, who I stole from Green Bay, and an active time as being one of the founders through his chamber activities with the new North and Northeastern Wisconsin, whether it's here in North Central and Northern Wisconsin, and we're going to touch on some of the things here as well, or whether it's in the Northwest, and a fair amount of time that we spent earlier in the summer into the fall, in particular talking about an issue that's important all across the board, the timber industry, but in particular with the help of the DNR and DOT and local officials in dealing with the wind blow that we had earlier this year, and making sure that we dealt with that effectively with our partners in both the private sector and local governments, not only because of the impact it had in places like Burnett and Douglas County, but because of the impact it has on the entire timber industry across the state of Wisconsin. All those things are important. So to have folks from all across northern Wisconsin here, it's a great opportunity to share, both to talk a little bit now about our vision for the state and economic development, and also for you to interact, not only with me. I'll be here, and then I'll be up for a little bit in between times meeting with some folks in Vilas County, then I'll be back, and I hope you'll join me this afternoon as we hold our Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation board meeting here as a part of this. I'm particularly thrilled that you've got, for the next 2 panels after I'm done, you get a chance to interact with, it was interesting, we had a small business summit up at Lambeau Field about a month and a half ago. And one of the columnists who was there afterwards wrote a great column, not about me. It wasn't bad about me, it just wasn't about me at all. It was about these guys and the panel you're going to hear right after them. And seeing just an extraordinary team that we have in place leading your state government in a way that I hope you'll find today is very willing to interact, particularly with small businesses in the state, not just through economic development, but through every one of our state agencies. We understand that the core industries in the state have been and continue to be manufacturing, they continue to be agriculture, they continue to be tourism. Those are the industries that built the state's economy. Those are the industries that will continue to take us out of this economic downturn we in the country and the globe are in. And there are others that we can add to that, but those are still the bread and butter. And so I think you're going to see from the cabinet secretaries here, there are people who appreciate that, many of whom have come from the private sector, who have that kind of experience and expertise, who understand, and we're going to talk in detail about that. So whether it's the panel here that represents economic development, tourism, natural resources, and transportation, you're going to hear later from folks from workforce development, revenue, the Public Service Commission, as well as the Department of Revenue. You're going to hear from entities all across the state. And what I hope you'll find, and what they found right after I took office, was that we have a clear focus. Everybody in our cabinet knows that our goal is to help all of you, not the government, but the people of the state, create 250,000 new jobs by 2015. And so it's not just economic development that talks about it. It's every state agency, it's every state program. In fact, you'll remember we got a kick out of this at one of our cabinet meetings not long after taking office. We had the gentleman who heads up, former banker, retired banker, community banker, who heads up the Department of Financial Institutions, got up and he said, well, Governor, I want you to know I took to heart what you said about 250,000 jobs, and I want to be clear, I'm so committed to it. I went out this weekend and I tattooed it across my shoulder. And they all know Peter's a pretty, fits the part of a banker, committee banker, pretty kind of solid guy, but not exceptionally flamboyant or outgoing, just a solid, friendly kind of guy. And so we all got a chuckle at him saying that. And I said to Peter in response, I said, well, I appreciate that, but I want to crush your forehead. Because that's the kind of focus we want. And so to all of you, to businesses, to local governments and tribal leaders, to everybody who's here, we appreciate that. We know that really for us to move forward, we've got to invoke the spirit of Wisconsin. And that's something that, as much as times are difficult, that spirit that has made this state great for more than 163 years, I believe, can be unleashed to help us not only put our state's economy back in order, but ultimately to help us unleash that spirit all across the country and help this nation get back on its feet again as well. Now, a couple things in mind with that, and I didn't see in the back there. I should mention DADCAP as well, another great entity that's going to be on the next panel. So we've got, I mentioned the industry, I just didn't mention your agency, so I'm thinking about agriculture as well. But again, I look out at this crowd and think about folks from our university system, our technical schools, think about our private business sector and all of our economic development corridors here and across the state. I think there's some rich opportunities. Now, let's just kind of begin though with an honest assessment where we're at. Over the last 3 years up until 2011, from 2007 to 2010, we lost about 150,000 jobs in the state. Now, we're obviously not alone. We saw at the end of 7 going into 8 and 9 that this state, this nation, and really around the globe, we saw an economic crisis like we haven't seen in generations. And so, and there's no one given policy. There's a series of things, and it doesn't really do us a whole lot of good to go back in time and point a finger as to who or whom is to blame in all this. It's rather about how do we move forward. So this year, right off the bat, in January, we decided to take action right away. You see, I believe for any of you who have your own businesses, if you're taking over a business that's in a crisis, you don't wait a year or 6 months or even a month, you act on it right away. And so what we've done is called the legislature to a special session in January. We had another one we called in September, solely focused on jobs. Passed major reforms, put in place tax relief, particularly for businesses, small businesses, employers. We put in place regulatory reform to try and stop the excessive regulations that we heard time and time from businesses, particularly small businesses, were concerned. We passed major tort reform to help you cut through the cost of litigation in the state, to pull back on frivolous lawsuits. We even took what in the past, if you believe it or not, we were one of a handful of states that still had a state tax on health savings accounts. We repealed that tax to make it more affordable for small businesses and workers and farmers to access affordable health care. And then we took something that in the past, we used to have a Department of Commerce in the state. It was in part about promoting commerce, but it was also about ultimately regulating commerce. And we said we're going to set that aside, we're going to eliminate that, we're going to take its functions and either get rid of them or put them in other areas and instead create a new public-private partnership called the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Now, many counties throughout this state, particularly throughout the north in this region, have economic development corporations at the local level. They've been highly successful. We decided that to do this was not about taking that and having the state replace that, but rather having the state be a direct partner with our counties, with our regions, with our larger 7, soon to be 8, hopefully, economic development regions in the state, was that the WEDC could truly be a partner in helping put in place economic development. I'm going to touch on some of the things we like to do there and overall in the state in just a moment. We did all these things right off the bat. Now, I'd like to see us moving forward with more jobs quicker than we are, and I think there are more things we need to do to make that happen. But the good news is after 3 years of losing 150,000 jobs, to the end of last month, we created in the private sector more than 20,000 new jobs in the state of Wisconsin. On top of that, I think equally as important, we've created a better business environment so that small businesses and other employers can feel comfortable taking that risk